Someday I plan to have a video made on every single killer. The downside of this is, of course, that this is a live service game, and eventually most killers, hell, most aspects of this game are going to change completely, and I'll still find myself having to make updated versions of videos I've already made, which, as someone who hates treading old ground, really irritates me a bit. But thankfully, every month and a half or so, new patch drops, which I can most of the time squeeze 1 to 3 videos out of, which doesn't seem like much, but trust me, coming up with a new and interesting topic to talk about day to day is not easy, and sometimes I find myself wanting to just sit down and make a bunch of tier lists, like which killer would make the best cuddler, or which P100 survivors scare me the most when I see them in the pre-game lobby. Even this video I'm starting the script for on Friday night after spending the past 3 days wondering what Monday's video is going to be, and I still don't know what I'm going to do for Wednesday through Sunday of the coming week. But with that being said, let's talk about win streaks in Dead by Daylight. Now, I'm not sure when win streaks became a thing. I know it was far before my time, and I do know that win streaks used to be relatively small to what they are nowadays. 50 to 100 was the standard for making a video on the topic, and I'd say even that was pretty fucking high. But now many content creators are showcasing 5, 6, 700, and even one Blight bloke did 1,000, which sparked a huge controversy and discussion on Twitter. I mean, it was Twitter, so it was more like a competition seeing who could excrete the most into their hand and throw it the furthest, but still, it was completely controversial, sparking tons of creators to talk about the subject and whether or not the killer was just way too overtuned. More nuanced people focused the discussion more on Blight than they did on killer in general, but still many Survivor mains were tossing around that obviously killer was far easier because you will never hear of a Survivor getting 1,000 escapes in a row. And I didn't comment on this whole thing back then because I didn't trust my experience to talk directly on the topic, as at the time I was still a mediocre killer main with bad game sense and barely any time in Survivor. Now I have a lot of time in Survivor, but I'm a dogshit killer main with good game sense and a growing YouTube channel where people tune in to listen to what I have to say on topics. For some reason. And while I won't be spending a large portion of this video talking about the Blight thing, I'll briefly cover it really quickly. My first inclination is to just simply not believe that 1,000 wins in a row is possible. My main problem is what constitutes a win in Dead by Daylight. Most say it's just a 3K, but some killer mains will say 3K with hatch, 2K with 10 hooks, only a 4K counts, what have you. Many killer mains fight constantly on what a win exactly is, and honestly I don't have enough liquor in the house to thrust myself into that hailstorm, so we'll stick to my opinion and leave it at that. In my eyes, a win is a 3K in general. Doesn't matter if you lose hatch or gates because that's most of the time RNG based, which is why bagging on hatch is quite possibly one of the cringiest things to do as a survivor. Ooh, cringy behaviors in DBD community. That's a video idea. Let me write that down. And I don't always get 3Ks. In fact, most of my games are 2Ks. Maybe that means I'm bad, but I think that means I'm just at the MMR the game predicts I should be in. But still, 1,000 wins is hard to wrap my head around, and I can't help but wonder how many of those games he just flat out ignored because he suspected a cheater, or he was tired and chose not to include it, or hell, he just autopiloted and straight forgot to count some losses, because hell, I do that sometimes. I'm not accusing the guy of anything, I'm just saying that 1,000 wins seems near impossible, and yes, this includes many people's personal favorite nurse main, including my own, Super Alf. Now, I'm gonna say, as I need to every time I talk about a creator, I love Super Alf. I find him incredibly enjoyable, he's funny, he's a troll, he's energetic, and in general I highly recommend him not only for nurse gameplay, but just general good vibes. Now let's talk about his current nurse win streak. Last night, as of writing this, Alf was at around 940-ish win streak on nurse, meaning that very soon, I'd suspect sometime next week actually, Alf is going to hit 1,000 wins in a row, and we will no doubt get a very entertaining video on it. But I noticed something. Alf never plays nurse more than 3 to 4 games in a row before swapping off and playing a different killer for at least one round, sometimes multiple. And while I admire all his nurse games or wins, this feels a tad disingenuous, and it really makes me wonder about that Blight win streak or win streaks in general. You see, the reason the win streak of 1,000 or 800 or whatever seems so impossibly high is no killer main, regardless of their skill, is going to, game after game, match after match, consistently perform that well. The MMR system will eventually throw you into a match against the fucking Avengers, and they will get a 3 to 4 man out on your ass. The matchmaker will not allow you to constantly get those wins consecutively before you start getting thrown against survivors who are just far too coordinated. And on top of that, constantly playing the same killer match after match gets boring, and like I mentioned earlier, can lead to autopiloting. Just for fun one time, I tried to see if I could get a pinhead win streak, streak. I made it around 25 before I noticed I wasn't even paying attention to the matches. My brain had pretty much turned off and I was just going through the motions, reacting to things as they happened instead of having some sort of forward planning and progression. So I wonder at what point I accidentally lost and didn't count it, and I wonder how much of this applies to these high win streaks. Or maybe I'm that way because I have my ADHD. I don't know. And I think that this switching killers is to avoid that matchmaker or autopilot or burnout factor, whatever. But it's not really a streak if you aren't playing the same killer back to back. Not in my opinion, anyway. See, the power structure of Dawnbreaker built Skyrim is a really confusing and nuanced topic. People say, killer be easier to win with, but not every killer. Hell, not even most killers are like that. Realistically, I think only Blight and Nurse might fall into the stereotype of play and win, and even then, I think Nurse is the only one who's incredibly forgiving, unless you're just a really bad nurse. Once you recognize the proper build and learn her blinks, you can correct a lot of your mistakes and more easily punish survivors for theirs. You see, Drastic Barking Dogs is a game about killers punishing survivor mistakes. If a survivor makes no mistake, you as killer don't really have a lot of options, which is why most good killers in the game are about forcing mistakes, mostly through sheer panic factor. There's also a lot of talk about how Survivor is obviously the weaker role because you will never hear some Survivor made hitting 1,000 escapes in a row. And to be honest, I think this line of thinking comes from the fact that most people don't understand you as an individual survivor are not supposed to be as strong as the killer. This is a common problem in balanced discussion where Survivor mains want perks and mechanics that allow them to essentially 1v1 every killer they come across, but that would completely disrupt how the game is supposed to work. In an asymmetrical game, the team with more people are supposed to have weaker individuals that add up in strength to the opponent. Survivors on an individual basis are only supposed to be about a quarter as powerful as the killer, so that 4 survivors equal 1 killer. You aren't supposed to be able to JRM or A-run 5 Jin loop every killer in the game, and you're not supposed to escape every game. That's why the perfect balance in a dream world where America doesn't suck as a country and Jennifer Love Hewitt is my wife, every match of Down the Rabbit Hole would result in 2 kills to escape. And sometimes you have to be one of the kills, because again, you are on a team of 4 people, and the killer is 1 person. That's why we expect the killer to get more kills than you get escapes. So with all this in mind, does these 1K win streaks mean the killers of Blight and Nurse are overtuned? No. It means there is a lot of factors we don't take into account. But what does make these 2 killers overtuned is the nurse can easily make up for her mistakes once you master her, and Blight doesn't know what the words bad add-on means, so he's almost always at an incredible advantage. There's a lot to say about these 2 killers, and as I said in the beginning, they will both get their individual videos in due time. And while I admire both the Blight bloke and Alf, I simply don't think we should use these 1K win streaks as talking points when we are speaking on Nurse and Blight, as there's too many caveats that don't constitute a true win streak in my opinion. But that's the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to leave your thoughts down below. Be respectful, and if you're a killer main, tell me what you consider a win. Also, a special thank you to Spirit Upgrades and Nuclear Bomb for being channel members. If you want to get a thank you at the end of videos, teasers for upcoming content, discount codes, and more, make sure you click that join button below. I love you all, and I will see you tomorrow.